Good day, everyone. So for this video lesson, the learning competencies will be: the learner identify the inverse, converse, and contrapositive of an if-then statement. Convert if-then statement into their converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So before we move to our next topic, let us first recall our past lesson about the if-then statement or the conditional statement. Okay, an if-then statement is also called a conditional statement, which is formed by joining two statements P and Q using the words if and then. Okay, pag sinabi po natin conditional statements, ibig sabihin, ito daw ay binubuo ng dalawang pinagsamang statement, where P is the first statement and Q is the second statement. Okay, the P statement is called hypothesis. Okay, and Q statement is the conclusion. Okay, paano natin malalaman kung hypothesis po yung statement? Okay, so tandaan po natin na kapag ang isang statement ay nagsisimula sa if o kadalasan ay nagsisimula sa if, ang tawag po doon sa susunod na statement after the word if is the hypothesis. Sa conclusion naman po, it usually start with the word then. Okay, after ng word na then, yung susunod na statement doon is what we call the conclusion. Okay, ano nga ba ulit yung hypothesis? Okay, ang hypothesis, it tells us the information or condition of the given statement, while the conclusion is the result of the given information or condition. Okay, every conditional statement has three related statements, and these are the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the conditional. Okay, what are the different variations of the conditional statements? Okay, first is the conditional. Okay, we write the symbolic form of conditional as P implies Q. And we read it as if P, then Q. Okay, sabi nga kanina, si P daw is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. Okay. So next is converse. Kapag converse naman po, we write it in symbolic form as Q implies P. Okay, kung mapapansin nyo, si converse kabaliktaran lang siya ni conditional, na kung saan sa converse mas nauuna sa statement si conclusion kaysa kay hypothesis. Okay, paano po natin siya babasahin? If Q, then P. Okay, next, inverse. Okay, inverse in symbolic form is not P implies not Q. Or, ang tawag po dito ay negate. Or, the negation of P implies the negation of Q. Not P implies not Q. Okay, ito po yan. If not P, then not Q. Okay. Contrapositive. Sa contrapositive naman, ang symbolic form po ng ating contrapositive ay not Q implies not P. Okay, nakanegate si conclusion, tapos nakanegate din si hypothesis. Okay, paano natin babasahin? If not Q, then not P. So, let us move on to our next topic, which is about the converse, inverse, and contrapositive. Okay, when we say converse, the converse of a conditional statement is formed by interchanging the hypothesis and the conclusion. Okay, pag sinabi natin converse, nag-i-interchange po si hypothesis and conclusion. Nagpapalit sila ng pwesto. So, for instance, the converse of P implies Q, yung ating conditional statement na P implies Q, kapag ginawa po natin converse, magiging Q implies P. Or, if Q, then P. It may be also be true or false. Okay, let us have an example. Conditional statement, if P, then Q. So, ano nga ba yung example nito? If you live in Davao, then you live in Mindanao. O, ano ang hypothesis? Okay, yung hypothesis po ay you live in Davao. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is you live in Mindanao. Okay, kung mapapansin nyo, yung ating hypothesis ay after the word if. Yung conclusion naman natin is after the word then. Okay, next. Sa converse. Paano natin siya isusulat into converse? Okay. So, ang gagawin natin is i-interchange natin si conclusion kay hypothesis. Mauuna na si Q bago si P. Okay, sabi dito, if you live in Mindanao, then you live in Davao. Ang ating conclusion, you live in Mindanao. Okay, ano naman yung hypothesis? Yung hypothesis, you live in Davao. Okay, nagpalit lang po ng pwesto. Mas nauna si conclusion bago si hypothesis. Okay, in this case, the conditional is true, but the converse is false. Okay, bakit naging true si conditional? Bakit naging false si converse? Kasi dito sa conditional statement natin, sabi kapag nakatira ka daw sa Davao, nakatira ka sa Mindanao. Okay, pag sa converse naman, kaya siya false kasi sabi, kung nakatira ka sa Mindanao, then nakatira ka sa Davao. So, false na po yun. Bakit kaya mali? Kasi po, hindi naman lahat ng nakatira sa Mindanao, nakatira sa Davao. So, maaaring yung ibang nakatira sa Mindanao ay nakatira sa ibang parte ng Mindanao. Halimbawa, sa General Santos o kaya sa Coronadal City o kaya sa Cotabato and so on. So, kaya mali po yung statement ng converse. Okay, another example. If you are a native Kapampangan, then you are born in Pampanga. Ano ang hypothesis? Ang hypothesis, you are a native Kapampangan. Ano naman yung conclusion? You are born in Pampanga. Paano natin siya isusulat into converse? So, kapag converse, magiging, if you born in Pampanga, then you are native Kapampangan. So, nauna po si conclusion bago si hypothesis. Okay? So, in this case, both the conditional and converse are true. So, pareho silang tama. Kasi sa conditional, sabi, kung ikaw daw ay native na Kapampangan, then ikaw daw ay pinanganak sa Pampanga. So, tama. Kapag converse naman, kung pinanganak ka daw sa Pampanga, then ikaw daw ay native na Kapampangan. So, pareho pong nagsasabi ng totoo or pareho po silang true. Next, inverse. Kapag inverse naman, the inverse of a conditional statement is formed by negating both the hypothesis and conclusion. So, inverse, inenegate po natin si hypothesis and conclusion. Kukunin natin yung kabaliktaran nila ng statement nila. So, for instance, the inverse of P implies Q. Diba, ito yung conditional natin, yung P implies Q. Ano yung kabaliktaran ng P implies Q? So, ibig sabihin, ang negation niyan ay not P implies not Q. Or if not P, then not Q. Okay, example ng conditional statement. If you live in Davao, then you live in Mindanao. Ano ang hypothesis? You live in Davao. So, ano ang conclusion? Then, you live in Mindanao. So, ito po yung ating statement. If you live in Davao, then you live in Mindanao. Okay, paano naman yung inverse? Kapag inverse po, ang gagawin natin is inedicate natin yung hypothesis. Kukunin mo yung kabaliktaran ng statement ng hypothesis, tapos kabaliktaran ng statement ng conclusion. So, kapag inverse, if you do not live in Davao, then you do not live in Mindanao. Kaya yan po yung hypothesis, nag-negate tayo, naging do not live in Davao. Kaya kapag conclusion, kapag nakatira ka daw sa Mindanao, pagka kinuha mo yung inverse nun, magiging you do not live in Mindanao. For the contrapositive, the contrapositive of a conditional statement is formed by interchanging the hypothesis and conclusion and negating both. So, ibig sabihin, magpapalit lang si hypothesis and conclusion ng pwesto doon sa statement and then inenegate mo lang po sila. Okay, for instance, the contrapositive of P implies Q. Ito yung conditional statement natin, magiging Q implies P. And then, kapag ninegate mo, magiging not Q implies not P. Or, if not Q, then not P. Okay, for example, conditional statement, if you live in Davao, then you live in Mindanao. So, ano ang ating hypothesis? You live in Davao. So, kapag conclusion, you live in Mindanao. Okay, kapag ginawa po natin siyang contrapositive, ito na po yung magiging statement niya. If you do not live in Mindanao, then you do not live in Davao. So, kung mapapansin nyo, yung ating conclusion napunta na sa first statement. Okay, yung you live in Mindanao dito, napunta na siya sa first statement ng contrapositive, pero naka-negate na siya. Okay, so nagkaroon ng do not. Okay, so naging statement niya, if you do not live in Mindanao. And then, pagdating naman po dito sa second statement natin, yung hypothesis natin ay naka-negate na din and naging ano na siya. Then, you do not live in Davao. So, ayan na po yung ating conclusion. Ito naman po yung ating hypothesis. So, for another example, state the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the following statements. For the conditional statement, if a polygon is a square, then it is a quadrilateral. Okay, our hypothesis here is a polygon is a square. And the conclusion, it is a quadrilateral. Okay, so for the converse, ano po yung magiging statement natin? If a polygon is a quadrilateral, then it is a square. Okay, kung mapapansin nyo, nagkaroon po ng interchanging si hypothesis and conclusion. Yung ating conclusion, siya na po yung ating first statement at si hypothesis ang naging second statement. Okay, next, for the inverse. Ang magiging statement po natin ay, if a polygon is not a square, then it is not a quadrilateral. Okay, na-negate na po dito si hypothesis and conclusion. Nagkaroon na siya ng word na not. Okay, doon sa contrapositive, so, ang atin pong statement dyan ay, if a polygon is not a quadrilateral, then it is not a square. Okay, so nagkaroon na po ng interchanging si conclusion at saka si hypothesis. And then, na-negate na po si conclusion and hypothesis. Okay, para po madaling matandaan, tingnan nyo po si conditional statement at si inverse. Magkapareho lang po sila ng statement, pero pagdating sa inverse, ay na-negate na po si hypothesis and conclusion.
Nagdagdag lang po tayo ng word na not. Pwede rin naman yung do not, pero depende po dun sa sentence kung bagay. Okay. So, dito naman sa converse and contrapositive, same statement, but, okay, tingnan nyo uli sa contrapositive. So, nanegate na po si conclusion at si hypothesis. And then, nagdagdag tayo ng word na not. Okay po? May tanong po ba?
Next example. Okay, so for the conditional statement, if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. Ano yung converse? Pagpalitin mo lang. If you are a musician, then you are a guitar player. Okay, paano yung inverse niya? Okay, yung inverse niya, if you are not a guitar player, then you are not a musician. Paano yung contrapositive? Pag contrapositive, if you are not a musician, then you are not a guitar player. Kaya tandaan na, si conditional statements, tsaka si inverse, magkapareho lang, pero ang pinagkaiba nila, nag-negate ka po dun sa hypothesis at sa conclusion. Okay, si converse naman at saka si contrapositive. Okay, pagdating kay contrapositive, nagkaroon ka ng negation kay conclusion at saka kay hypothesis. Next example. For the conditional statement, if two lines are perpendicular, then they form a right angles. Okay, pag converse, magiging if two lines form a right angles, then they are perpendicular. Okay, yung two lines daw, nakakabuo ka ng right angles, then sila daw ay perpendicular. Pag sinabing perpendicular, ito po yung lines na nag-i-intersect. Next, inverse. Kapag inverse, if two lines are not perpendicular, then they do not form a right angles. Next, contrapositive. If two lines do not form a right angles, then they are not perpendicular. So, yan po yung mga example. Next, example number 4. For the conditional statement, if a number is an even number, then it is divisible by 2. Okay, kapag daw yung number ay even, then ito daw ay divisible by 2. So, kapag kinonverse mo siya or sinulat mo siya into converse statement, so ang mangyayari po dyan is if a number is divisible by 2, then it is an even number. Pag binagbaliktad mo, kung ang number daw ay divisible by 2, then ito daw ay even number. Okay, kapag inverse, if a number is not even number or is not an even number, then it is not divisible by 2. Sa inverse, if yung number daw is hindi even number, then hindi siya divisible by 2. Okay, so contrapositive. Kapag contrapositive, if it is not divisible by 2, then it is not an even number. Kung hindi daw ito divisible by 2, then hindi daw siya even number. Okay. Okay, so for another example, for the conditional statement, if a triangle is equilateral, then it is equiangular. Okay, so ano nga ba yung hypothesis natin dito? So, a triangle is equilateral. Ano naman yung conclusion? It is equiangular. Okay, kapag converse, ang magiging statement naman natin ay If a triangle is equiangular, then it is equilateral. So, magkakaroon po ng interchanging si conclusion at si hypothesis. Okay, si conclusion naging first statement, while si hypothesis naman is naging second statement. Okay, sa inverse. Kaya magiging statement naman natin ay, if a triangle is not an equilateral, then it is not equiangular. Okay, kung mapapansin nyo, na-negate na po si hypothesis and conclusion kasi nagkaroon na siya ng word na not. So, siya po ay inverse. Okay, so contrapositive. Okay, ano naman sa contrapositive? So, if a triangle is not equiangular, then it is not equilateral. Okay, so ang nangyari dito, nagkaroon po ng interchanging si conclusion and hypothesis. Okay, naging first statement na si conclusion at naging second statement na si hypothesis. And then, na-negate na sila, nagkaroon na sila ng word na not. Okay, para madaling matandaan po, kung mapapansin nyo, conditional statement at saka yung inverse, same statement. Pero, pagdating sa inverse, nagkakaroon na ng negation or nagkakaroon ng word na not or pwede rin naman yung do not, pero depende po dun sa sentence. Okay. Ito naman sa converse and contrapositive, same statement, pero, pagdating po sa contrapositive, nanenegate din ang, ang hypothesis and conclusion. And then, ano nangyayari? So, nagkakaroon po ng word na not. Okay po? Sa pagtatapos ng video na ito, ay meron ako sa inyong iiwan na isang mahalagang quote na ang sabi ay, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So, by Nelson Mandela. Para po sa iba pang katanungan, maaari niyo po akong i-message sa aking email account na madeline.rodriguez15@yahoo.com or i-message niyo po ako sa aking mobile number na naka-flash sa screen at pwede rin po sa aking Facebook or Messenger or sa Instagram. Maraming salamat po!
Okay, para po sa alternative resources, pwede po kayong manood sa YouTube o kaya ay mag-search sa Google and then tumingin sa ibang reference ng mathematics book na pang grade 8 at dyan sa inyong learning module.